What would you do if the person you trusted most turned out to be a monster? The Mitchell family seemed like the picture of a perfect American household. Daniel Mitchell was a respected police officer with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, serving his community for over 15 years. His wife, Laura, was a devoted stay-at-home mom, dedicating her life to raising their 13-year-old daughter, Lily, a special needs child who required constant care. To the outside world, they were the ideal family. But behind closed doors, a horrifying secret was lurking. One night, Laura Mitchell walked in on a nightmare that would change everything. What she discovered inside her daughter's bedroom led to a shocking crime, one that made national headlines and left the world questioning justice, morality, and a mother's love. Stay with us until the end as we uncover the chilling details of this case. And if you enjoy these true crime stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Daniel Mitchell was a man respected by his peers and admired in his community. As a dedicated officer with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office for over 15 years, he was seen as a protector of the law, a man who upheld justice. To his colleagues, he was a trusted friend, and to his neighbors, he was the very definition of a good, honorable man. At home, his wife, Laura Mitchell, was the heart of the family. A devoted stay-at-home mother, she dedicated every moment of her life to raising their daughter, Lily. Lily was 13 years old, a sweet and vulnerable child with special needs that required constant care and attention. Laura did everything to ensure her daughter had a safe and loving environment, always putting Lily's well-being above all else. Together, the Mitchells appeared to be the perfect American family, a hardworking father, a loving mother, and their cherished daughter living in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Jacksonville, Florida. From the outside, their lives seemed picture-perfect. But behind closed doors, a dark and horrifying reality was unfolding, one that no one could have imagined. It was supposed to be a normal evening. Laura Mitchell had spent the afternoon running errands, picking up groceries, planning dinner, and looking forward to a quiet night with her family. But as she stepped through the front door, something felt wrong. The house was eerily silent. Too silent. Usually Lily's soft humming or the sound of the television filled the space, but now there was only an unsettling stillness. A chill ran down Laura's spine as she placed the grocery bags on the counter, her senses on high alert. Then she heard it, a muffled noise coming from Lily's bedroom. At first, it was barely noticeable, a whisper, a rustling sound. But as she moved closer down the hallway, the hushed voices became clearer. Something was happening behind that door. Her pulse quickened as she reached for the doorknob, a deep unease settling in her chest. Slowly, she pushed it open and froze. There, in the dim light of the room, was Daniel, still in his police uniform, on top of Lily. Her daughter's small frame was trembling beneath him, her face wet with silent tears. For a moment, Laura's mind refused to process what she was seeing. Her brain screamed that this couldn't be real, that it had to be a mistake, a nightmare she would wake up from. But as Daniel turned, his eyes meeting hers, the horrifying reality crashed down on her like a tidal wave. The man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with was a monster. And in that instant, something inside her shattered. Laura didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. There was no time for questions, no room for doubt. In that instant, pure instinct took over. Her eyes darted to the nightstand, where Daniel kept his off-duty gun. Without thinking, she lunged for it, her fingers closing around the cold steel. Before Daniel could react, she raised the weapon, her hands steady, her heart pounding, and then she pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the small room, deafening and final. The bullet tore into Daniel's back, sending him collapsing onto the floor beside the bed. he gasped, his hands clawing at the wound, eyes wide with shock. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and spreading. But Laura didn't lower the gun. She couldn't. Lily was curled up in the corner of the bed, her small body trembling uncontrollably, her tear-streaked face frozen in fear. And then, Daniel moved. A low guttural groan escaped his lips as his hand fumbled toward his service weapon, still strapped to his holster. Laura saw it. She saw the flicker of movement, the desperate attempt to fight back. And she saw red. Without a second thought, she pulled the trigger again. This time, the bullet struck Daniel's head. His body jerked once, then went completely still. Silence filled the room. Laura stood there, her breath ragged, the gun still clutched in her trembling hands. The man who had been her husband, the father of her child, was now just a lifeless body on the floor. And yet, all she could think about was Lily, her baby, her innocent child, who had been betrayed in the worst possible way. Laura turned toward her daughter, her heart breaking, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. Laura stood frozen, the gun slipping from her trembling hands as reality crashed down on her. The room smelled of gunpowder and blood, the silence thick and suffocating. Her pulse pounded in her ears, her breath shallow and uneven. Then her eyes shifted to Lily, her sweet, innocent daughter, curled up on the bed, her small body shaking, her tear-filled eyes locked onto the lifeless form of her father. Laura's knees buckled, but she forced herself to move. With shaking fingers, she reached for the phone in her pocket. Her hands felt numb as she dialed, her mind blank except for one agonizing thought. What happens now? The call connected, and a calm, detached voice came through the line. 911. What's your emergency? Laura swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I shot my husband. Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out. He was hurting our daughter. Minutes felt like hours. Then the distant wail of sirens shattered the heavy silence. Flashing red and blue lights filled the house as officers stormed in, weapons drawn, until they saw him, their colleague, their brother in arms, lying lifeless on the floor. The air shifted, thick with disbelief and tension. No one spoke at first. Then orders were barked, and hands were on Laura, yanking her away from Lily. Cold metal cuffs snapped around her wrists. She didn't resist. She didn't fight. As they led her toward the patrol car, she turned back, searching for one last glimpse of her daughter. Lily was being carried out by a female officer, wrapped in a blanket, her face buried in the woman's shoulder. Protective custody. Safe. That was all that mattered now. As Laura sat in the back of the squad car, staring blankly ahead, she knew one thing for certain. Her life, as she knew it, was over. The moment the news broke, the story spread like wildfire. A mother had shot and killed her husband, a decorated police officer. Headlines screamed about the shocking crime, reporters swarmed the courthouse, and the nation became obsessed with one question. Was Laura Mitchell a murderer, or was she a mother who did what had to be done? Prosecutors painted her as a vigilante, a woman who took the law into her own hands. They argued that no matter how heinous the crime, justice wasn't hers to deliver. The law existed for a reason, and by killing Daniel instead of calling the authorities, she had committed cold-blooded murder. But the defense told a different story, a horrifying truth that had been buried for years. They presented damning evidence, medical reports that confirmed Lily had suffered prolonged abuse, scars both physical and emotional that couldn't be ignored. Experts testified about the trauma Lily endured, the pain no child should ever have to experience. And then came the most unsettling revelations. Past complaints about Daniel, whispers within the police department, reports of misconduct that had been quietly brushed under the rug. Even his own colleagues hesitated on the stand. Some admitted there had been rumors, stories about Daniel that no one wanted to believe. Looking back, the signs had been there all along, and yet the system had failed Lily, again and again, until the night her mother decided to stop it herself. For 3 days, the jury deliberated. The courtroom remained tense, the air thick with anticipation. Outside, the world debated. Was Laura Mitchell a murderer? Or was she a mother who had no other choice? News outlets dissected every angle, legal experts weighed in, and the public remained divided. But for Laura, there was no debate. She knew why she pulled the trigger. She knew what she had protected Lily from. Now, she could only wait for 12 strangers to decide her fate. On the 3rd day, the jury returned. As they filed into the courtroom, silence fell over the room. Laura sat stiffly, hands clasped, barely breathing. The judge asked for the verdict, and the foreman stood, unfolding the slip of paper that would determine the rest of her life. We find the defendant not guilty. The words barely registered at first. Then the weight of them crashed over Laura like a tidal wave. Her body shook, tears spilling down her face as she gasped for air. She was free. But as the gavel struck, she knew the world would never see her the same way again. To many, she would always be the woman who killed a cop, a murderer who took justice into her own hands. But to Lily, her daughter, her baby, she was something else entirely. She was a mother who had done what no one else would. She was a savior. Justice had failed Lily long before that night. The signs were there, the warnings, the complaints, the unspoken truths that were ignored until it was too late. The system that should have protected her had turned a blind eye, leaving her defenseless. In the end, it wasn't the law that saved her. It was her mother. But the question remains, what would you have done in Laura's place? Would you have waited for justice that might never come? Or would you have taken matters into your own hands? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories.